My brother is there.
When my 3-year-old daughter visited her grandparents' house for the first time, she pointed to the old shed and said those words. I was stunned. There's no way. It can't be. 5 years ago, our son went missing near his grandparents' home when he was only 2. We searched that area thoroughly, but if my daughter is saying it, she must be right. After all, she has an extraordinary gift. With trembling hands, I opened the heavy door, and what I saw inside left me speechless. It was also the moment I was freed from my long suffering. It was 3 years ago, right after my daughter Emma was born.
Our daughter was just born, so let's forget about Daniel.
My husband, Jeff, told me that. But
It'll be better for you, Sophia.
I bit my lip and didn't argue. It might have been his way of caring for me, but I couldn't forget our son, Daniel. He had gone missing because of my carelessness, and I had blamed myself ever since. That day 5 years ago, the tragedy happened on a Sunday in April.
Could you visit my folks today?
Jeff asked me strongly, which was unusual for him. Sure, but why so suddenly? Is something wrong?
My parents want to see Daniel.
They seem to want to celebrate Easter with their grandson. The in-laws' house is in a rural area, more than a 2-hour drive away. Jeff works for a big company in New York, and I work from home as a translator, so we rarely make it back to see his family. It's a bit of a drag, but since they're Daniel's grandparents, I thought I'd make them happy. There was another reason I hadn't visited often. My mother-in-law, Mary, had always been tough on me. But with my parents already passed away, I convinced myself to leave my husband, who had to work on the weekend, and headed to my in-laws' house with my son.
Here comes my grandson.
As soon as we arrived, my in-laws welcomed Daniel with open arms. However, as expected, Mary glared at me.
Jeff ended up with a worthless wife. Not only did she take my son away, but she also keeps us from seeing our grandson.
I'm sorry, work has been so busy, I just haven't had the time.
I never liked you from the beginning, acting all high and mighty while having a job, even though you're a woman.
She hurled me one cold comment after another.
You've changed, my son. He doesn't come this home anymore.
But that was Jeff's own decision.
I don't want to hear that. It's all your fault.
No matter what I said, Mary wouldn't accept me. Standing next to me, my father-in-law, George, was kind, but it seemed he couldn't voice his opinions to his wife and pretended not to hear. If Jeff had been there, he might have defended me, but all I could do was endure it at the moment. Still, my son Daniel was thrilled with his first Easter decorations. Moreover, my in-laws' house was a large and splendid mansion where they ran a company. In the spacious garden, there were also towering magnolia trees.
Mom, here you go.
Saying this, my son approached, holding magnolia flower petals in his hand. He was giving them to me as a gift. Thank you, Daniel. Daniel smiled contentedly as I responded. Then George called out to me.
Sophia, I'm sorry to ask, but could you help me carry some boxes?
He meant to carry about 10 large cardboard boxes stacked in the back of the pickup truck into the shed. Daniel, come here. I pulled my son, who had been squatting under the magnolia looking at the petals, and left him with Mary indoors. Please look after Daniel while I help George.
Umph.
Mary, not even looking at me, pulled Daniel close and hugged him with a smile. Relieved to see this, I went back to the garden to help George. After a while, having carried all the boxes, I hurried back inside, but Daniel was not with Mary. Mary, where's Daniel?
What? I don't know. He said he was going to his mom.
No, he hasn't come to me. Frantically, I searched the house and the surrounding area, but he was nowhere to be found. My son had vanished suddenly. How far could a 2-year-old walk? Maybe into the forest? Behind my in-laws' house, there was a dense forest, and I feared he might have wandered into it. Daniel, where are you? Answer me, Mommy's here to pick you up. I frantically searched and shouted until my throat was hoarse, but my son's reply never came. My husband arrived, responding to my call, and comforted me as I grieved.
It's not your fault.
There's no point in searching any longer.
Mary said this on that day. Please, I beg you, can you report this to the police and ask the locals to help us? Determined not to give up, I pleaded desperately with Mary.
No way. I don't want to report it to the police because it's not good appearance. It's the mother's fault for losing sight of her child in the first place.
I'm sorry, but instead of arguing, we should be looking for Daniel.
Yeah, Mom. We can't worry about what people think right now. I'll ask them myself.
If Jeff says so, there's no choice.
Reluctantly, Mary agreed after Jeff asked her, and she contacted the locals for assistance. Seeing that only Jeff stood by my side almost brought me to tears. Thank you, honey. I'll contact the police then.
Sophia, I think it's better not to do that just yet.
Why not? We have to find him quickly.
The maze of streets in the countryside are more knowledgeable by locals. The police might prioritize finding a culprit over searching. Let's focus on getting help from the locals first.
I only wanted Daniel to be found quickly, so I followed Jeff's suggestion. Despite many people joining in the search, my son couldn't be found. We really need to report this to the police.
Yeah, I'll go now.
An hour later, Jeff returned and said that the search would extend deep into the mountains and that they'd consider the possibility that someone had taken him. Please find him soon and let him be safe. Despite searching everywhere, I couldn't find my son. 3 days after he disappeared, Jeff took me back home. After that, I started visiting my in-laws' house alone and kept searching the mountains and surrounding areas.
You lost our grandson, so don't ever come back.
But Mary turned hostile, and eventually, I could not approach my in-laws' home. In hindsight, maybe I should have searched quietly without telling anyone. Even in such a situation, Jeff always supported me.
I plan to cut ties with my parents since they keep treating you poorly.
One day, he told me this suddenly. What? Are you sure that's okay?
I don't need parents who cause you pain, and we should stop looking for Daniel. I'm worried about your health.
Since Daniel went missing, I couldn't sleep or eat, and I was so thin my bones stuck out. With Jeff's persuasion, I chose to believe that Daniel was being cared for by someone and was living happily. Eventually, I became pregnant with my second child, a girl we named Emma. I've never forgotten my son, but I decided to shower my daughter with all the love I have for Daniel as well. Actually, Emma has a special gift. For instance, whenever I'm looking for something without saying a word, she often brings it to me right away. One time, she even helped me directly while walking through a nearby neighborhood. Emma murmured.
That guy wants your bag, Mom.
Sure enough, a young man on a bike came toward us and reached for my bag. At that moment, I switched hands, causing the man to lose his balance and fall. Nearby witnesses subdued the would-be thief, and he was handed over to the police. Because of things like that, I believe Emma truly has a gift. However, Jeff didn't believe me when I told him.
That's creepy.
Afterward, I stopped sharing these stories with him. When Emma grew up and turned 3 years old,
Where are my grandma and grandpa?
suddenly, Emma asked me. My heart skipped a beat when she said that. In hindsight, my in-laws adored their grandson. At the time, I was so overwhelmed by grief that I hadn't considered how much they must have suffered when Daniel went missing too. Maybe I'm being selfish for not letting Emma see them just because of my feelings. With that in mind, I decided to consult with Jeff.
I've cut ties with those awful parents. There's no need to let our daughter meet them now.
He wore a grim expression and strongly opposed the idea. But there was something unsettling about his attitude. In hindsight, I think it was a warning sign. A few days later, I decided to secretly visit my in-laws with Emma for the first time in years. After arriving at the nearest station, I called to say I'd be taking a cab to their house. For some reason, George seemed flustered.
I'll pick you up right away.
With that, he abruptly hung up. Since I was already in a cab, I tried calling him back to avoid missing each other, but I couldn't reach him. Soon after, we arrived near the house. As Emma and I walked hand in hand along the narrow path to the house, she suddenly pointed to an old shed behind the house.
My brother's in there.
What? Emma hadn't heard about Daniel, so it was strange she suddenly mentioned this. Could it really be true? Clinging to the faintest hope, I peeked into the dimly lit shed, and what I saw shocked me. A boy's wide open eyes were chained to a post. It was my beloved son, whom I hadn't forgotten for a single day in 5 years. Daniel. I desperately tried to get to the entrance of the shed, but it was locked, and I couldn't open it right away. I swung the hatchet I found nearby over and over again until I finally managed to break the rusty, old lock. I finally found you. The moment I hugged my son, tears flowed down my cheeks.
Who are you? Are you here to help me?
With a puzzled expression, Daniel looked at me, and I called out to him. Let's get out of here right now. Looking worried, he murmured,
Grandpa and Grandma locked me up. Do you think they'll be okay?
No way, that's impossible. I was so shocked I was at a loss for words. It turned out that my in-laws were involved in the incident of my son's disappearance. I'm your mom. I've been searching for you all this time. I grabbed pliers from a toolbox in the corner of the shed and cut through the chains to free my son. With both kids, I hurried down a path into the mountains. I'd scouted this area several times while searching for Daniel and knew the terrain fairly well. I need to call Jeff first. Thinking this over, I took my phone out of my bag. Until then, I had been so focused on helping my son that I hadn't noticed I had a ton of missed calls from Jeff. Hello, Jeff.
Sophia, finally, I got through. I'm heading to my parents' house now. Don't talk to anyone local.
Jeff was saying something strange, insisting that the locals couldn't be trusted. He knew we were at the in-laws' place without me telling him, which must have meant George had informed him. Even so, why is he so against reconnecting with the local people who helped search for Daniel when he went missing?
So, where are you right now?
I'm at the station waiting for George. I had a bad feeling, so I decided to lie to Jeff on purpose.
Okay, that's good.
When Jeff sounded relieved, I felt that he didn't look right. With that in mind, I continued walking down the mountain path with my children and decided to stop by a house on the way. It belonged to Charles and his wife, who had helped search for Daniel 5 years ago. Hello, well, I found Daniel. When I called out to them, they gave me a puzzled look.
What are you talking about? He was found shortly after.
What do you mean?
I was told he was found in the shed right after you left.
No way. While I was confused, Charles told me. However, they had been told by the in-laws that Sophia had an affair and left, so we'll raise Daniel in our house. That's a lie. When I vehemently denied this, Charles seemed perplexed.
This doesn't match what we heard at all.
The locals had believed the in-laws because they occasionally saw Jeff at his parents' house and attending Daniel's school. Does this mean Jeff deceived me together with them? That's unforgivable. My whole body shook with fury at the thought of being torn away from my son for 5 years. At that moment, it was my daughter Emma who gently took my hand.
Mom, it's good that we found Daniel.
She said with a smile, then held her newly found brother Daniel's hand with her other one. Daniel was puzzled, but he looked at Emma and then glanced up at me. His previously stern expression softened, and he shed tears as he gazed into my eyes.
You're really my mom, right? You didn't abandon me, did you?
It seemed Mary had told him otherwise,
Your mom left you and disappeared.
and he had been subjected to strict training as their grandson. His upbringing had been so harsh that he wasn't even allowed to seek comfort from his grandparents. I took out my phone and showed him the many pictures of us together up until he was 2. I never forgot about you, not even for a day. Now we'll always be together. Daniel nodded quietly. Right before I met Daniel, my in-laws had taken him to the shed and chained him up after receiving my phone call.
Don't make a sound. Stay hidden.
My blood boiled with anger, imagining how terrified my son must have been. I'll never forgive them. Charles and his wife had seen what was happening and offered to help. I quickly called George and Jeff and told them we were at the Charles home. Then, the first one to rush over in a panic was Mary.
Don't you dare take my grandson without permission.
She angrily tried to strike me, but Charles and his wife held her back. This boy is my son. You lied about him going missing, didn't you?
He's not Daniel. He's my daughter's kid.
Mary tried to make excuses, claiming he was my sister-in-law's child.
No, he's my brother.
Yay, that's not what we heard. This boy is Jeff's son, right?
Mary stammered, looking around nervously. Then George showed up, yelling and trying to take Daniel away.
We've got ties with her.
But George forcefully tried to drag my son away, even though he wouldn't let go of me.
Stop that. Can't you see he doesn't want to go?
Charles also intervened, doing his best to protect my son.
Sophia, what are you doing? I thought you cut ties with my family. Let's go.
Then, this time, Jeff came running over, his face pale, and he told me something with a frantic look. I won't be fooled anymore. It was you who separated Daniel from me.
Don't say weird things. I've always supported you, Sophia.
I glared sharply at Jeff, who kept trying to cover up. I can't trust you. I've already decided I won't let go of my boy.
I don't know that kid. Daniel's gone. Forget him.
Even with our son right in front of him, Jeff kept denying it. Hearing this, Daniel's face tightened.
I'm not your kid, Dad.
I don't know you.
But Jeff continued to throw these cruel words at him. I won't forgive you. This time, I'm going straight to the police.
Even if you say something so outrageous, they'll just laugh it off as a family dispute.
Jeff tried to avoid trouble, but he couldn't get away. I have evidence. I'd kept a detailed record of how Daniel had disappeared, thinking it might be useful someday. I had documented even the smallest things that happened afterward. I had also photographed my son chained up in the shed.
I had nothing to do with that. My parents did everything. I wasn't involved.
Jeff, what are you talking about now? You said you'd pass Daniel on as the heir in your place.
Mom, stop it. Don't say another word.
Jeff tried to maintain his ignorance, but Mary counted, and the two ended up arguing fiercely. In their attempts to justify themselves, the whole truth finally emerged. On the day our son went missing, Jeff conspired with his parents to take Daniel out through the kitchen's back door and drove off in a car parked a little way away. Then they temporarily left him at my sister-in-law's house in a distant town. When things had settled down, they brought him back to in-law's house where his in-laws raised him. So, of course, he couldn't be found anywhere. That's why you wanted me to cut ties with your parents and keep me away from here.
That's right. But you came with them on your own, and it all got exposed.
This whole incident was orchestrated by Jeff, who was pressured by his parents for an heir. He wanted to keep living in the city, so he offered up our son as a replacement. You're horrible. You only think about yourself.
But what else could I do? I hate the countryside. There was no choice but to hand over Daniel. You would have opposed it if I told you, right?
Of course. How could I ever give up my own kid? Jeff tried to maintain his ignorance, but Mary counted, and the two ended up arguing fiercely. He only told the locals to help find the child, and of course, Jeff never even went to the police for help. I'd been completely deceived.
I'm sorry, but please, don't go to the police. Daniel's fine now.
That's right. I raised him with love, so it's fine, isn't it? Besides, we're family.
Please forgive us.
Even George said that, and both Jeff and my in-laws came pleadingly in tears. I'll never forgive you. I never want to see your faces again. I stared at the three of them, firmly rejected their pleas, and pushed them away. At that moment, I could hear the approaching sirens of the police guard that Charles had called. When the officers arrived, I showed them the photos of my son chained up, and Jeff, along with his parents, was taken away in the car. Later, Jeff and my in-laws were interrogated and arrested. I decided to divorce Jeff and claimed $30,000 in damages and $300,000 in child support for 2 kids. I also charged his parents $20,000 in damages. Fearing a harsher sentence, his parents gave up their property and assets to pay the amount in one lump sum. Because he was convicted, Jeff was fired from his job, and now he survives by juggling several part-time jobs to make payments. As for the three of them, even though they put their house up for sale, it hasn't sold, so they're still living in the same place, isolated and shunned by the community. Well, it's only natural since they deceived everyone. As for me, I now live peacefully with my 2 kids, away from Jeff's reach. Daniel smiles more often and gets along well with his sister Emma, and I'm extremely happy right now.